this meeting to order. And it looks like we do have a quorum, only missing you all. And moves us to agenda item 1.03, additions and modifications to the agenda. And I move to amend the agenda to add a discussion on S124. And I'd like to have that discussion happen right after agenda item 5.05, update on the body worn camera release policy. And I open the floor for discussions on the motion. Sorry, you're muted.
Jabu, I'll second the motion.
And sorry, so now, is there any discussions on the motion on the table?
No.
I'm not seeing any. All in favor for adding a discussion on S.124? All in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. That looks unanimous, and that passes. Moving on to agenda item 2.01, approval of the minutes from our last meeting, 9/29/2020. I have Commissioner Hart motioning to approve the minutes. Do we have a discussion on the table?
Sorry, who was the second? I didn't catch it.
So I think Sharina was the first. I'll second that.
Okay.
Is there a discussion on the floor for approving the minutes? I'm not seeing any. All in favor of approving last meeting's minutes, say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
I'm just going to abstain because I wasn't at that meeting.
Fair enough. So that passes. So that passes 5 yays and 1 abstaining because they were not part of the team last time around. And I guess with that being said, I guess I should officially introduce Stephanie Seguino, our newest police commissioner. And I believe you've met most everybody here, but if anyone who doesn't know Stephanie, please say hello and introduce yourself.
I think I know everybody except Mr. Sullivan. Yeah.
We met in person actually many years ago, Stephanie, when you began the data analysis.
Okay.
I think in the initial meeting in the Detective Services Bureau,
Right.
we were discussing data collection and analysis. So
Nice
it was a little
to see you.
while ago now. I want to say, probably at least 8 years ago.
Okay. Nice to see you again. Thanks.
Yes, but I'm the administrative deputy chief now.
Great.
Awesome. Moving on then, we'll go to agenda item 3.01, the public forum. And this, I'll let Shannon take it away.
So I didn't have any requests, except I do see Lee Morgan is on, and maybe I was mistaken and she wanted to speak tonight instead of last night. So, and there you go, Lee.
Hi, can you remind me, please, how long I have to speak?
You're the only person, so I'll give you 5 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I guess I was a little confused because on Front Porch says that the commission was tonight. So if I got that wrong, I apologize which one I was supposed to speak at. But all right, here we go. Hello, commissioners, Miss Trammell, apologies if I'm saying that wrong, and Chief Murad. My name is Lee Morgan. I am a resident of Ward 7. I'm going to speak about 2 recent incidences that have disturbed me greatly. Both incidents involve Vermont police officers, one being a Burlington officer. On October 12th in Barrytown, Officer Jeffrey Strock of the Berlin Police Department murdered Julie Fandino. Julie was Officer Strock's ex-girlfriend. Officer Strock wanted to get back together, and when Julie said no, Officer Strock shot her several times while her 23-year-old daughter was sleeping. On October 16th, Corporal William Drinkwine of the Burlington Police Department was charged with unlawful trespass at his ex-girlfriend's house, a felony charge. As a domestic violence survivor, these events are far too relatable. My abuser very nearly strangled me to death 7 years ago. My abuser has managed to track me down after every time I move. I must be hyper vigilant of my surroundings for the next time I am tracked down. I think of Julie Fandino and I wonder when the moment was when she knew she was about to die. Did she have time to think about her daughter? While I was being strangled and began to pass out, I remember the feeling of realization that I was about to die in the presence of my higher power. I hope Julie felt her higher power in the moment before she was murdered. I am so very proud of the woman who called the police on Corporal Drinkwine. It is a statistical anomaly that she did. I also appreciate the actions of the Burlington Police Department to suspend the corporal and take his badge and gun. I encourage the BPD to consider methods and systems to screen for current and potential risks and incidences of domestic violence. I will be following the case of Corporal Drinkwine closely. I hope you will too. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And I believe you said there was no other public comments for today?
There wasn't, unless anybody wants to raise their hand.
All right. I'll give another 30-ish or so seconds. See if anyone wants to raise their hand and comment on anything. Commissioner Durfee.
I just wanted to thank the caller and show her some compassion and let her know that she is never alone and that I too have been impressed by the work of the Burlington Police Department in this matter. And I too see the distinctions between the two and the timing. And so I want her to know that I am aware, and the chief and I did talk about that. So thanks for being brave enough to call her.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I'm not seeing any more hands for people that want to speak during public comment. So we're going to move on to agenda item number 4, the Chief's report. And with that, I'll let Chief Mira take it away. Sorry, Chief, you are muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Ms. Morgan. You and I have had a number of conversations on other issues, but thank you for speaking. The month in review and the Chief's report. In the past 27 days since our last meeting on Tuesday, September 29th, that is from 9/29 through 10/26, there have been 1,821 calls for service, 21 assaults, 4 of which were felonious, 4 sex assaults, 1 robbery, 169 suspicious events, 73 noise complaints, 83 vehicle crashes, of which 5 incurred injury and 36 were leaving the scene of the accident, 63 disturbances, 70 traffic incidents, 40 foot patrols conducted by officers, 50 incidents of threats or harassment, 45 domestic incidents, 42 of which were domestic disturbances and 2 of which were domestic violence felonies, 2 incidents of calling for fireworks, 7 overdoses, and 5 untimely deaths, including 1 in which officers worked for some time on the individual, performing CPR until relieved by BFD, and then fortunately still having a BFD call that person at the scene. I will distribute these numbers to everyone, and they will be in the report as they were in the minutes that we just approved. I apologize again for not getting them to you beforehand. I try each week, each time, I really do. Anyway, some other incidents, some other issues I'd like to share. Staffing. Since the new budget was passed, we've had several resignations, and we are now at 87 official as our head count. One of those is a long-term sick, and one of those is a suspended officer. That drops us to 85 effective. Additionally, one of our best officers just turned in his resignation and will serve his last day in uniform on November 9th. That's a tenure-related resignation. He has reached his 20, but real asset to the department. And that drops us to 84 before our next meeting. We will be at 84. Another officer is in the process with the Vermont State Police, which will put us to 83 by mid-December, assuming no other losses. And on top of those departures, again, assuming no other losses, we have an injured officer who's currently assigned to clerical duties and is anticipating potential surgery, and several other officers who we may lose to a potential long-term Vermont National Guard military deployment. Back in July, on July 31st, the Burlington Free Press reported that nearly 1,000 Vermont Army National Guard soldiers are expected to begin one-year deployments the first half of 2021 to various locations as part of the quote-unquote largest Army mission set in over 10 years. And that was according to a press release from the National Guard, and again, reported in the Burlington Free Press. I believe that our largest potential loss to that deployment would be 6 officers, and that could potentially put us at 77 sometime in the first quarter of 2021, again, assuming no other kinds of departures. And amidst that is the workload that we've been incurring. One sort of issue that I'd like to point out, we keep track on a weekly basis of the people with whom we've had the most incidents in that time period, the weekly time period. We have one individual currently in jail right now after an aggravated assault committed last week, who had incurred 84 incidents with the Burlington Police since August 1st. 84 incidents in under two and a half months. 84 incidents that were increasing in violence until they culminated with this aggravated assault that was sufficient to have him held by a judge in a correctional facility. During that time period, the individual was twice given emergency evaluations and yet released, and continued to have that kind of pace. That's an extreme outlier for us, and a person who has all sorts of challenges that we as a community need to meet better. Challenges that surround mental health, challenges that surround substance abuse disorder, challenges that surround a propensity for violence and disorder. But that individual isn't alone. During that time period, we've had one individual who that's 5 weekly reports tracking individuals. One individual who had 10 encounters during one weekly report, and then had 3 during a following weekly report. One individual with 3 during one weekly report, 3 during another weekly report. One individual with 6 during a weekly report, 4 during another weekly report, 7 during another weekly report. And those are really high resource intensive individuals that the men and women here deal with on a regular basis. I am really looking forward to us being able to get the ball rolling on this assessment, this full operational and functional assessment of the Burlington Police Department and how it polices, so that we can take a look at these kinds of volume loads and determine what it is that we're able to do better in order to serve these people better. It shouldn't take 84 incidents for us to get to an individual being held in a way that keeps everyone else safe, but not him, frankly. And that isn't necessarily the solution for this individual being held in that way. We have to have and find others and other ways of helping these folks who are members of our community. And the recurring connections with these people are indicative of that. We deal with these folks again and again and again as police officers. We're not alone. The fire department does as well. Howard does as well. The court system does as well. And I'm looking forward to really being able to assess how it is that we can do that better and do that in a way that is less about the police alone being the responsive agency, if that's a possibility for us. And I believe that it is. So that is, I guess that's actually my report. I guess the other things that we have to deal with are other items on the agenda later on. So thank you.
Sorry, thank you for that. Anybody have any questions for the chief in regards to this report? I'll start with Commissioner Seguino, followed by Commissioner Hart.
Chief Murad, can you explain the foot patrols you mentioned? I forgot how many foot patrols there were. Was that a call for service and they responded on foot?
No, foot patrols are self-initiated by officers, generally in our downtown area, but they occur in other parts of town as well. I quoted 40. There were 40 foot patrols during the period. And again, I will put all of these, I will include the data specific for you that goes from police commission meeting to police commission meeting into an email that Shannon will distribute and include it in the minutes. But we also on our Twitter page do it on a month-to-month basis, and these same sort of calls for service that have just emerged as reasonable proxies of kinds of calls that people are interested in. There are 133 calls for service categories, but these are ones in which people are generally interested. Fireworks, frankly, probably can fall off at this point. It was of interest during the beginning of the summer and less so now. But foot patrols are self-initiated. An officer pulls up at the parking space that's reserved for officers there on College Street near where Reroz used to be and says, I'm going out on foot and I'm 10-8 for calls. So they're still available to take calls for service while they're there, but they've put themselves on this. And if they encounter some other kind of call for service, the foot patrol doesn't turn into that. The foot patrol just sort of ends and the new call for service 10-10 because they observe a fight or something where somebody says, needs assistance in some other way, that will just take over the officer. And so that's what foot patrols are.
Just one other quick question. Do you notice any trends with the numbers that you just gave us? Are they an increase over last year? Do you have any sense of the call volume and the types of calls relative to the past?
So we definitely this year are going to see a massive downswing from the period of March through May and into June. It ticked up, but it is down from last year. However, that trend has been over the past several years. The trend has been one of a really sharp decrease driven almost entirely by self-initiated calls, not foot patrols, thankfully. I don't think that we've seen an egregious decrease in those. Those are important, and certainly we want officers to do those. Officers, frankly, want to do them, especially those who seek the D area assignment. But we've seen drastic reductions in traffic stops, and traffic stops are also examples of self-initiated calls for the most part. And the drastic reduction in that alone comprises about 60 to 70% of the overall decrease that we've seen in type 1 calls for service, which aren't. If calls for service can be a misnomer because it sounds like it's people calling for service, and it isn't in all cases. But that overall trend, which is mostly located in our type 1 calls for service and not located very much in our type 3 calls, which are the most serious, those have remained steady over the past several years. We will see a decrease in them for 2020 owing to COVID-19. And then our type 2 calls, which are in between, we saw those driven down a little bit owing to, I think, some part of officer initiation, but driven up at the end of during 2019 owing to increases in disorder, especially in the Church Street area. We'll see that decrease as well once we crunch the totality of the 2020 numbers. Right now, we've dropped from previous times where I've read off these numbers to the police commission because it's October and it's colder and everything drops off a little bit, and we'll continue to see that until the weather turns once again in, I don't know, when does the weather turn again? Mid-August, and we get 2 great weeks or something, I think, right? So in seriousness, it comes and goes. I think this is probably a little down, but I don't believe this is any further down than the trend was already demonstrating over the past several years.
Great. Thank you. Thanks.
I believe Commissioner Hart, you're next.
Thank you. Chief, are you about to trigger something under the BPOA with your staffing levels? Is it called emergency? I can't remember the term. I was just trying to read quickly in the contract and I wasn't finding it, but isn't there something in the 80s?
It's called emergency staffing and it happens at 80. It is not my wife says it is snowing. I guess it's snowing at least in the New North End. So that's something worth noting. The emergency staffing is not an automatic It's not something that happens the instant that 80 number is triggered, but it is something that we would take into consideration. There's some other models that we would take into consideration as well once we reach that number. But there's a reason that exists in the contract. At that point, you really do, you lose the flexibility necessary to be able to perform the tasks that we're currently performing with regard to 24-hour service, with regard to full complements of officers on both day shifts and both evening shifts and both overnight shifts, as well as the necessary number of officers to be assigned to the Detective Bureau. So that does happen. At 80 is our moment of truth to really start considering which ones we're going to adopt, what new plan we're going to adopt.
And has it been triggered before?
During the late 1990s, there was a brief period in which emergency staffing pertained owing to a series of buyouts of older officers. I want to say sometime in 98 or 99. It lasted 8 to 9 months, as I understand it. And was it was very hard on the officers. It's not a kind schedule. It has an unusual rotation. It removes officers from the regular assignments that they prefer. As I mentioned before, there are officers who love downtown D area because they want to be out on foot and to be interacting with people and to have that kind of pace. And that gets removed from officers in an emergency staffing configuration. It's hard on decision-making about planning vacations and things. And although the world is different right now, we anticipate going back at some point to a world where we get to go to, go on trips again and things. But that once upon a time was the regular schedule. It's something that unions have bargained for not to have for quite some time now.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments for the chief? I am not seeing any. Moves us on to agenda item 5.01. That is a parking update from the Department of Public Works. And I'm assuming that will be Mr. Paget, and I'll let you take it away, sir. Excuse me, I'm not sure if you are muted or not, if you are trying to speak, because if you are, we cannot hear you.
There we go. There we go.
There we go.
Thank you. It's hidden up in the corner, just out of my view. All right, so let's start again. So my name is Jeff Paget. I am the Assistant Director for Parking and Traffic over at DPW. And as you are probably aware, actually I can turn my camera. There we go. There you can see me. So as you're aware, the FY21 budget was passed back in July or whatever. One of the conditions of that was looking at creative ways to take services that are within the police department and put them in other departments where maybe they're, or where, not necessarily where they're more appropriate, but there's services that can be done by other departments. It's not necessarily a policing activity. So what that manifests itself is moving the parking enforcement group into DPW. So since August or so, I've been meeting with DC Sullivan, John King, and Director Spencer to formulate a plan to ensure that this department, the parking enforcement group that John King leads, is effectively migrated into DPW. They do a good job. We don't want to mess it up. So we put together a plan. I've got 4 or 5 slides here that I can share with you to give you a flavor. I've got actually about 15 slides I can for a long time. But I got 3 or 4 or 5 slides that I could show you to sort of give you the idea of where we're headed, how we're thinking about this, and some of the progress that we've made over the past couple of months. So fundamentally, what we are trying to do is define a roadmap to improve and refine the parking experience in Burlington with an integrated approach to sales, service, and compliance. basically what's happening now is I sell parking and John King enforces parking. So if somebody buys parking from me and they have a problem with their parking experience, they get a ticket, which is just a crazy, it's a crazy situation. So what we're trying to do is say, okay, let's integrate this into a unified approach. So let me flip to the next slide here. So basically what we're trying to do, maybe I go down to this actually. So what this document does is this lays out what the purpose of this project is, why we're doing it, what our vision and mission is, what our values are that guide this process, who we think the stakeholders and the players are, and then what the project phases and timeline are. So I got a slide on all these things, but I think what you guys for now really care about, and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, is what does this look like? So what we've done is we've broken this integration. So we started out calling it a migration, but we realized that it's not a migration, it's an integration. It's taking parking services from one department and integrating them with parking services. So phase one is administrative integration and reorganization. So we're actually, I've got a draft memo set right now that's going to go to City Council on November 9th that will administratively move the budget and the human resources into my control, so to speak, move them to DPW. So it's literally the mechanical moving of budget and the mechanical moving of boxes on the org chart. So once everybody's in the same room, so to speak, and we're all in the same department, and I have quote unquote the authority over all of it, then we start looking at operational integration. How can we take, so basically John King's group sells resident parking. We sell parking passes in the garages. How do we integrate that so that we have a single point of contact, a single source for all parking permit needs? And what does that mean for integration of staff? What can we use John King's group to do that some of my group does? What can some of my group do that John King's group does? And that will allow us to start talking about this consolidation of sales, and customer service, and compliance issues. Now, what this will do is it will blow open the door to a conversation about ordinance change and charter change. Not to get too deep in the weeds, but the parking garages are in a sequestered budget. Money is not allowed to flow out of the garages. So we may, in order to be as optimal and creative as possible, we may need to approach charter change to change that budget restriction. So anyway, there's a lot of interesting stuff in phase two on reorganization optimization. And then we get to phase three, which is what everybody jumps to right when I first started talking about this. They want to know when John's going to move out of the police department or where his office is going to be. Well, we don't know yet. And it's going to really depend on how we integrate the services. Where does it make the most sense to house this parking service? Does it make sense at 645? Does it make sense at the police department? Does it make sense as a storefront on Church Street? Don't know yet. And there's also technology that it has to integrate. He has a whole citation program platform. It's actually the same vendor that we have for our parking garages. So there's a possibility we could lay those platforms together. So there's a lot of possibly expensive and data complicated systems that need to get integrated. But that's all, I mean, that's all not till way down the line. We got to get through phase one and phase two first. So roughly speaking, the timeline for this is we spent a couple months building this integration plan that I'm talking about right now. And now we're in phase one. Like I said, we're going to City Council on the 9th. I skipped one step. So DC Sullivan, John King, and Chapin and I, we met for a number of months in this integration plan development. And now I'm meeting weekly with a group that includes John King, some of my staff, some of BPD staff, as a working group to sort of hash through some of the let's say technical aspects of integration. So we're looking to get through this phase one of getting the mechanics done and working on this reorganization by the end of the year. We'd like to have a reorganized department by the end of the year, and then start thinking about how we get into these next two phases. phase 2 and phase 3, probably not till February timeline. So we're moving deliberately, slowly. We don't want to screw up John's group. We want to make the transition smooth. We want to do it right. So anyway, I could go on and on, but I think that's the core of what most people want to know is what's your plan and when are these things going to happen? So happy to answer questions, or if I blew past something that I don't see because I'm in the weeds on it.
Any questions for Mr. Paget in regards to this?
I'm raising my hand, Jabu, but I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't see you. Commissioner Durfee.
Thank you. So this plan, I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. It looks like it's going to create some efficiencies and really like draw people together. I think that's the purpose of this plan. So is there a cost reduction? That's what taxpayers are thinking about. Is there going to be a cost reduction with this implementation?
Well, we will see when we get into phase 2. I'm really hesitating because right now we have a staffing plan for the garages, and we have an org chart for the garages, and we have an org chart for John's group. But I really want those org charts to come together in that phase 2. And if there are ways that we can optimize staffing, then yes, we will look at that. But one of the goals of this is not to eliminate positions. That's not a goal. But
no, I'm sorry. I'm not talking about eliminating positions.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about creating efficiencies, and that's not always somebody losing their job.
Right. Okay.
Making the work that they do more efficient. So because you're talking about two departments together, and to me, in my experience, that means that people will be working more efficiently. Yes. I don't want anybody to think I'm talking about people losing their job. That's not effective. What I'm talking about is saving money on something that's more efficient for taxpayers.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. Yes, absolutely. I was actually having a conversation today with our operations foreman at the garages. He does a lot of customer service, but he's also in charge of managing 13 people. He's in charge of an incredible amount of stuff, and on top of that, has to do face-to-face personal interaction with customers. And John's got 2 folks on his team that do customer service. So I've actually been emailing with John just today about, what's his perspective on moving some of this customer service work into his staff. And then, the first thing he said, well, maybe we went, third customer service people. So this is what I'm saying is we need to get into this phase 2. I need to get through phase 1, start to understand where all the boxes are on the org chart, and then get into phase 2 and say, okay, where are the real operational efficiencies? So the answer is yes, we're looking at that.
And just one more follow-up on that. So it looks like the first thing in the timeline is the city council is going to approve a budget on expectation of moving the parking enforcement from BPD to DPW. So there is a budget.
So yes.
No? Oh, there is. Okay.
Yes. It's the current. But what happened was the BPD budget was streamlined and organized so that the enforcement budget is sort of in a box and it's clean. There's no sort of tangential tentacles sticking into it from BPD. The enforcement budget is put in a box. Lee's Verno did a great job at that. So what I'm going to the city council with is that box, and that box right now has the code in it is 17, and I want to change that code to 19, and that's it. No up, no down, no changes at all. Just move the spreadsheet, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful.
Yeah. And same with HR, same with personnel. I'm updating the job descriptions to remove reference to BPD and doing a little bit of housekeeping and cleaning, but no changes beyond just the mentioning of possibly the customer service folks doing some of the customer service work for the permitting at the garages.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any further questions or comments? I am not seeing any. Mr. Paget, thank you very much for this. It's good to know what it's going to look like moving forward, and good luck to you
Great.
in future work.
Great. Thanks, Todd.
Awesome. Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye.
All right. Moving on to agenda item 5.02, which is an update of Department Directive DD 02.02, grooming standards, uniforms, equipment, inspections, and use of tobacco products. I will flip this back over to Chief Murad to explain this for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say with regard to John King was hired by this police department by the city of Burlington in 1965. John King has 55 years of service at the moment and is an amazing repository of knowledge about the city, about the PD, where he did, I don't know, 32 years, and about parking. And certainly one of the single most important parts of this transition is making certain that we download as much of John as we can as we move, as we take this entity and share it from one part to another part of the city. But, just worthy of note, I think, that level of service and that tenure. To Directive DD0202. So DD02.02 is grooming standards, uniforms, equipment, inspections, and use of tobacco products. It was a split directive. It was a single directive until the end of last year, at which point we worked for a long time internally in the BPD to have a discussion about these kinds of issues, uniform standards for the most part, but also some other parts. And we gave it to the Police Commission last year for them to review and approve, and the Police Commission did. Thank you. What we found, at least with regard to, so no problems with DD02.01, have seen nothing there, but with regard to DD02.02, we found a little sort of a lack of clarity that was initially corrected by a memo back in January. So not too long after that was initially approved. A memo was sent out to the body to clarify that one discussion of Class B, basically it's a small matter. It's the fact that Class B uniforms, which are similar to what I'm wearing right now, technically this is a Class A because it has certain amounts of it has these shiny things on the epaulets. It's a little bit more formal. Class B looks similar. We don't see a lot of officers in Class B anymore, unfortunately, in my opinion, but the officers were able very convincingly to demonstrate why the load carrying vest is so much healthier for them. But we wanted to make certain that officers could wear this Class B uniform under an external vest carrier, and that hadn't been really stated in the directive, so we clarified it. Recently, we had an issue with some officers who were interpreting a and or phrase that should have been and to say that they could wear their name or their shield number, and that really has to be shield and name number. And so by that time, I said, okay, we've got two things now that are small corrections, but since there are two of them, I might as well just ask the commission for permission to republish the directive in all respects the same as you approved last December, except for these two changes. And those two changes were sent out in red and shown to the commission. And I hope you will agree are pretty small pro forma changes, one of which is truly an enhancement with regard to making certain that we have officers with names and numbers at all times when they are in uniform.
And with that, I'll open the floor to discussion on updating this on this department policy.
I'm happy to bring a motion to approve if that's where we are, if there's no discussion.
I'm not seeing any discussion or any need for discussion. So if you want to make a motion, please do.
So moved. That we adopt it as amended.
And I saw Commissioner Durfee's hand right before Commissioner Harp, sorry. So she seconds it. All in favor of approving the updated department directive, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
And I think that is unanimous. So that passes unanimously. Thank you all for that.
Thank you very much.
And moving on to Agenda item 5.03. Continuing our discussion from last meeting on the City Council's resolution asks specifically that we begin a review and analysis of impediments to stronger disciplinary measures involving brutal or excessive force. And I know Shireen has been working on a draft for this. I know it still needs a little bit more work on it, so I don't think there's really much to discuss on this unless Commissioner Hart wants to add anything to that.
I would just add that my hope is that we would approve it in the November meeting. I would not circulate it that day, but give it to folks in advance. And if they had feedback, then we could talk about it at that meeting. But the hope would be to vote on it at the November meeting so it could be presented. It's supposed to be delivered to the City Council by the end of November.
And does anybody have any further discussion on this? I'm not, sorry, Commissioner Hart.
Just a quick question. I assume, Commissioner Hart, that you don't mind people contacting you before you circulate something just to check and see about where you are in the drafting process?
I would welcome anyone who wants to see it. And no, I would be thrilled. I've gone through, I have a draft, and the reason I'm not doing much with it at this point is because I'm not satisfied with it. So I would love to have some input on it and other thoughts. It's not meant to be from me, it's meant to be from the whole commission. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that update. Moving on to.
Hi, I'm sorry. Could you send out what you already have?
I can send it with a little more work, but yes, things have gotten so complicated, Nilo, with open meeting law. There was a lot of discussion. What my concern is, just yesterday on our joint committee meeting, I got the sense from hearing the city councilors who just had training that my concern suddenly, and I'm saying this because I'm still trying to digest this, is that there are some limitations on our ability now to even circulate a document. What I was reading is what we're supposed to do is send it out, and then but because we always want to reflect what we're doing to the public, they should always know the process. That what we're supposed to do is send it out, and then at the next meeting, like you would send me your changes, and then at the next meeting we would talk about what was sent and the changes. I'm happy to send it out. I'm trying to digest all of this open meeting, make sure that what I'm doing is in keeping. So I will send it, and I need to get this off my desk and get it to other people to weigh in on. So thank you.
All right.
Chair, do you mind if Joy is if one of the city attorneys is on the phone, if she can speak to what that process could be? I'm putting her on the spot completely. Sorry, Joy, but it came up last night.
Yeah, we did discuss this a little bit last night. I think it's totally fine if you want to send it around for people to look at. It just can't have any discussion over email about proposed changes and things. So if people have proposed changes that you want, to just ask that you don't email those back, but that you bring them to the next meeting for discussion.
Commissioner
Sorry,
Hart.
just to clarify that one point, those even suggestions for revisions can't even be made one-on-one. So if a draft is circulated to a group for kind of consideration of future meeting, then does that foreclose one-on-one email conversations about potential revisions, or no?
Not necessarily. I just want to, there's a fine line between two people having a discussion about something and then getting to the point where everyone is having that one-on-one conversation to do it separately. So I mean, if there's a phone call saying like, hey, let's talk about this, I think that's okay. But I do just want to urge refraining from having group discussions in the creation of the draft.
Even what would essentially be serial group discussions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. If there's no further discussions on that, we'll move on to.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Seguino had a hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that.
It's okay.
Commissioner Seguino.
Joy, just trying to thread this needle. Would it not be feasible to, at the next meeting, provide the first draft that Shireen is going to send us and then the amended draft based on individual feedback that we give for revisions? I mean, in that way, all of that information then becomes public. There's no subterfuge there, but it does give the opportunity to make these revisions before the meeting so that they can actually be discussed at the meeting.
So I think what we want to do there, which is something that happens at City Council too, is to post the original draft and then also post people's proposed changes.
Yeah.
With that, and then if someone beforehand wants to combine those all into one, as long as we have each individual proposed changes, I think that's okay.
Great.
All right. Any further questions or comments?
So just to confirm, I believe it was said that the City Council expects this back at their November meeting.
That is my understanding, yes.
So then we would definitely want to do it the way that it was just discussed, or we wouldn't have it done if we didn't do it the way it's just discussed, realistically.
Right. They said the report is due November 31st. So yes, I think that is the goal, is to have it voted on at our November meeting if possible.
Which would be Thanksgiving week.
I believe I was gonna get to that at the very end of the meeting, but it was either gonna be 11/17 or 11/24, depending on scheduling due to Thanksgiving.
Okay, thank you.
Very welcome. Any other further questions or comments? All right, moving on then to agenda item 5.04, which is continuing a discussion the mayor's press conference asked from a month ago. And basically he has tasked us with coming up with a policy to release information to the public pertaining to investigations involving police misconduct. And I have reached out to a couple people, one being Senior Staff Attorney Jay Diaz from the ACLU, and I've reached out to a couple other people I know that are attorneys in various aspects of the law that kind of deal with this kind of stuff, and I'm awaiting feedback on that. I hope to have a draft written the next week and a half to then circulate and move on with this current new process of working on drafts in hopes that we have a draft we can vote on by our next meeting that I can turn into for the 31st of November to City Council. Mayor. And if anyone has any questions or comments on my process on that, happy to take your questions. Commissioner Seguino, followed by Commissioner Durfee.
Sorry, this is a question just because I'm new. So you're working on drafting this policy yourself in consultation with these various entities? Okay.
Yes, I'm not having them write it for me. I'm just looking for input on questions that I have and how to best formulate that. With that said, policy writing is not my strong point, but due to open meeting laws and this restrictions, I don't really know a much better way to go about doing it. Unless somebody that is well versed in writing policy would like to take it upon themselves. But if not, like I said, I'm more than happy to do that.
Did you have a starting point for a policy? Did you look at some other cities that might have something similar?
No, in my reaching out to people, I asked if they had any documents pertaining to this that could help steer me in this, and as I said, I'm awaiting response from some people on that.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Next, I believe it was Commissioner Durfee.
Yeah, just one quick question about that. So we were looking at suggested language from the city. Is that not being considered at all? My understanding was that Jay Diaz or the ACLU was going to take a look at that as a starting point, but I'm not sure I understand you correctly. Are you going to write something from scratch then and not use that document at all?
So when I talked to Mr. Diaz, basically he hadn't sent me any information at all yet. He requested that that we have a conversation like over the phone or in person, just to kind of see where I was at, because he stated that what I asked him was far too complex to put in just the email by itself. So I was going to meet up with him and then kind of lay out some of the things I think that needs to be included in that, and then kind of go from there. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like it. My question.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, I can't see my mute button because for some reason there's a warning over it. Yeah, I guess that answers the question.
Any other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any, so I'll move us on to agenda item 5.05, which is.
I apologize. Can I go back to the previous?
Of course.
Just briefly, have you? So you have or have not consulted with the city attorney about the constraints that the contract between BPOA and the city imposes on releasing information?
I reached out and I'm awaiting reply on that.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 5.05, which is an update on the body-worn camera release policy. And I guess I got the email you sent me, and I guess if you guys just want to update the full council on, I guess, where we are at on that. Commissioner Durfee.
Okay, so I must be confused because I thought we were talking about that before, but so yes, we this was due actually to the city council by the end of this month. They had the mayor had requested that the police commission look at this policy. In looking at the policy, there's a number of things in play in terms of continuing to work on the policy, continuing to look at different things. There's things going on in the legislature. There are things going on in the city that have a potential to impact this work. So I just, in researching everything and look at everything, I looked at what was presented from the city, and there's some significant issues with what was presented. So I thought that's what you were talking about, Jabu. I'm sorry if I'm off. I thought that's what we're talking about in terms of like talking to the ACLU, because I know that we did have some concerns with some specific language in that policy.
Commissioner Hart.
So I was just going to address that quickly and then talk about some of the body council. Yeah, so my understanding is that there are kind of two issues on the table. And one is whether or not material relating to investigations, disciplinary investigations, can be released to the public. And the second question is whether the guidelines that might govern whether or not the BPD can proactively release body-worn camera footage in cases of interest to the public. So the previous discussion was about investigatory materials. This discussion is specifically about body-worn cameras. And I did have some questions about, right, so the mayor has asked us, well, the mayor was hopeful that a policy could be approved by the end of October. I suspect we will not be able to meet that particular deadline because there's still some things to discuss. But I wanted to have some questions about the memo that Mayor Weinberger sent out with kind of guidelines what he would like to see in structure a body camera footage release policy. So the memo that the mayor circulated, I think there's a little bit of ambiguity. I'd just like to ask either Chief Murad or, since Kyle Dodson is on, also Kyle, just to kind of resolve some of those ambiguities, at least that I have. So the memo kind of seems to make two distinctions. One is with respect to body camera footage that governs incidents in three categories, right? Body camera footage that governs incidents involving police use of force resulting in serious bodily injury or death, police force that involves the use of aerosols, conduct electrical weapons, etc. And the third is body-worn footage that addresses incidents of significant public attention or concern. So that's kind of one category. And then there's a separate category which just governs how the department is releasing footage in response to Public Record Act requests. And it seems to me as though, right, so there's a kind of disclaimer that says that privacy and release timing goals can be achieved using one or both the following methods: A, fully blurring the video footage so that individuals cannot be identified, or B, fully redacting audio data. And I think it was unclear, and I gather from some of the concerns that JT as the ACLU put out also, there was some confusion about whether or not that requirement of redacting, fully blurring video footage or fully redacting audio data, whether that applied to footage from both of the categories, category 1 and category 3, or just the material that was requested through a public records request. My understanding from seeing the memo was that kind of footage that the mayor or that the chief or that the police commission deemed to be of public interest, or footage that governed kind of serious uses of force. I'm sorry, uses of force involving serious bodily injury, I should say, that those were not subject to the qualification that they might be fully blurred or the audio would be fully redacted. But it was, like I said, it was unclear to me. So could I get some clarification on that point? If the question wasn't clear, I'm happy to rephrase it. And I'll offer that to either, like I said, either Chief Murad or Kyle, if you'd like to weigh in also.
I'm not actually entirely certain. I don't know if Director Dodson wants to weigh in. I certainly also would open it up to Deputy Chief Sullivan or Deputy Chief LeBrecq about some of these issues. There are, lights just went out. The fact is that were it not for redaction requirements under the law, I think that we'd almost want to release all of it. It is the redaction and the costs of that, the very prohibitive costs of that make it difficult for us. And so we're going to trend towards trying to minimize those costs in whatever way we can, while maintaining the real need for transparency.
Right. So if I could just jump in really quickly before Enos wants to follow up. Right. So my understanding would be that the items, and again, I'm saying fall under category 1. So incidents involving police use of force resulting in serious bodily injury, incidents using aerosols, et cetera, incidents that the police commission determines are significant public attention or concern, that there are not so many of those cases every month or every year that would make a more selective redacting of that footage in order to meet the requirements impracticable or impossible. That the only concern is that with respect to public records requests, that those might be so numerous as to make it impossible to kind of more selectively redact that footage. That was my understanding. Was that not what you were thinking of?
I think, Matt, please.
I was just going to add, I know we've had this discussion previously, but we lack capacity to do this. So currently we have one person who has any experience redacting video. and she has a lot of other job responsibilities. She is our ID technician. She's responsible for cataloging and maintaining all of our evidence, and that is her primary responsibility, as well as crime scene processing. So this is an additional responsibility that she has taken on with this technology. And she is the only one, as I said, who has this experience. So although you're correct, Commissioner Harp, that there are less incidents of this nature, it would still be a burden on our capacity currently.
Is the burden the number of people that are trained, or the way that would kind of detract from an officer's currently assigned duty? So I'm essentially wondering the difficulty of training extra officers to be able to just do that particular kind of redaction.
I
would you estimate?
Honestly, it's both. We just don't. Our capacity is so diminished at this point that the officers that we do have currently, I believe we have 5 general detectives in the Detective Services Bureau currently who have a caseload that is essentially maxed out. And then we have our uniform officers where we're barely able to staff shifts at this point. So being able to take some of those people and attempting to cross-train them, it would be very difficult to answer requests in a timely way as far as any sort of redaction. Again, going frame by frame, 30 frames per second, depending on the length of the video. Which is why my personal opinion is I would prefer to release everything unredacted. I don't know that that we necessarily disagree. Obviously, we want to respect people's privacy where that's a concern, but I believe the statute actually says that it gives you justifications to redact. I don't know that it's a requirement to redact.
There are certain statutes that do require information to be kept private outside of the Public Records Act. So there is an exemption in the Public Records Act for information that is by law confidential. So that information, it would be far less than the exemptions in the Public Records Act, but there is still some information that is required by law to be redacted and not just allowable to be redacted.
I think I saw Commissioner Durfee with her hand raised for comment. Question.
Yeah. So I just opened some notes that you had written, Randall, about your comments. So I just want to be clear on the purpose of reviewing the mayor's memorandum and his encouragement. That was the same day that, Kyle came on board, his encouragement to try and get, a fully formed policy. And I think the reason, and I'm just, I was appointed on 6/29, so I wasn't around for any previous conversations, but when you look at that actual document, folks have asked for this. This is part of a resolution that's being worked on. And so there was a sort of a general feeling in the public that, we want to know what the policy is. We want to know why we can't see something. And one of the things I thought was important and missed in this memorandum was that, and, in speaking with other more experienced commissioners, we see unredacted footage as a citizen body. Police commissioners can see that unredacted footage. And so I think the main concern was that citizens were feeling like, okay, this is something that we're being kept out of, kept away. How can we have access, more access? And so that's not in the memorandum. It does not say that the police department can view, police commission can view the unredacted footage. And I think, from a citizen's perspective, that makes me feel better knowing that someone can look at that. That was the concern. That's why we were asked to do this work, is because people in the community were saying, you know what, we really want to know under what conditions this can be released. So that's missing from the memorandum. And the other thing that's missing is, when you look at it, and I think this is, I'm not even going to try to, paraphrase the question that Randall was posing, but if you look at item 3, and I wish I was sharing my screen because I think that would be more appropriate. I want to talk about the staffing levels. I want to talk about that. I want to bring that up because if I'm wrong about this, somebody can jump in and tell me that I'm wrong about this, but this is a memo that is really meant to satisfy the public's need to know their rights. And so every time this topic comes up, there's, a lot of discussion about what we cannot do, what we don't have the technology to do. We can't do it. We're understaffed. We don't have enough people. And I totally get that. I totally understand that because I've been to the police department and I've seen what it takes to redact. So I get that. But on number 3, it says, number 2. No, given the current staffing of the Burlington Police Department, the department does not have the capacity to fully redact videos consistent with the Vermont Public Records Act. However, there are reasons, and that goes on to Randall's question. But honestly, if we're being asked, I get confused because there's all kinds of things going on, and we're going to talk about S124 and we're going to talk about S119, all active in the legislature, and sooner or later laws are going to be passed on this. Right now, looking at this document, I think it's not about staffing. It's about technological advances that have not, been made. If you even had 100 more people to do this, my understanding is that the process is so cumbersome that it really isn't going to help. What people want to know is, can somebody see it unredacted? Who can see it unredacted? And when can they see it unredacted? Who is looking out and protecting this footage? It's pretty simple to me. So I really want to say those things because those are the issues that I have with the memorandum. And, when you're looking at 3 and you're saying, okay, well, we're not able to keep up with the Vermont, the law, but in these other ways we can. That's something to me that, I guess the city attorney, Eileen, worked on this. Everybody else worked on it. Those are the questions I have. It's like, okay, is that a full policy then? If you can't adhere to the Vermont Public Records Act, but you can do these other things? Just the language really tripped me up on that. So if anybody has any, feedback or thoughts on that, that'd be great.
Commissioner Harper.
Thanks. So this is not actually a direct follow-up, Commissioner Durfee, to your question. This is one of these questions for Joy, and I'll actually just start with that question. You had mentioned that the Vermont Public Records Act makes some claims about things that some protected categories that would allow for certain data to be held back, but it doesn't require that it be held back. And you suggested that there were other statutes that do require that certain information be kept from the public or held back. And I'm wondering, first, do those statutes you're thinking of, do those govern only kind of city entities, or do those also govern private entities such as newspapers, right? Because I'm thinking of footage which kind of gets acquired by the media through discovery and civil or criminal cases that gets released eventually. Though that material usually is not redacted. So I'm essentially wondering kind of how extensive are the statutory restrictions on information that can be released, and do those just govern the city, or do those also, or would be the same restrictions for other entities?
That's an interesting question. I think it kind of, I'm going to give you the lawyer answer. It depends on the statute and the information involved. So for example, one is like information related to juveniles who are within court jurisdiction. That is directed at the custodians of the information. So the court, the police department, the state's attorneys, etc. And then there's others. I'm not sure if I can think of an example off the top of my head where it would be directed at like maybe an employer that had specific information like social security numbers and things like that. So it really is kind of a case specific inquiry there.
Yes, but then it seems to me as though those categories are somewhat limited. And so I'm hearing both Chief Murad and DC Sullivan saying, look, if it were up to them, they just release kind of everything, at least what they have without redactions. And I'm hearing you say that the number of cases in which material needs to be redacted are pretty minimal,
I
at
would
least off
say
the top of your head.
in reviewing public records requests, which I do quite a bit, that is not an exemption that we use too frequently, but it definitely does come up with some regularity, but it certainly is not the bulk of the redactions that we make in a document.
Right.
I do
that
think,
material. Go on, sorry.
I do think that it certainly should be part of the consideration. I understand that you're trying to do this to find a way to efficiently share this information with the public, but there is information that we generally do redact under the Records Act, like victim information and things like that, that I want people to keep as part of the consideration in this, that there might be sensitive information about individuals who are not necessarily directly involved in the incident in question in there.
No, that's absolutely right. So look, I would prefer that that especially with videos that are judged to be of kind of particular importance or sensitivity, that those videos be kind of released in a way which can address public concerns, so that material gets released more broadly. I understand that kind of with general public records requests, it makes sense to me that material might be would have potentially more redactions to it, just because again, like if it is a labor-intensive process to determine if someone, for example, wants to submit a public records of every single video that the department has, that would be then a kind of time-consuming process to go through all of that and determine whether any of the any of these categories are, whether any kind of violations in any of those videos. But for material that is judged of particular interest or importance or sensitivity that the commission or the chief or the mayor determines needs to be released, it seems as though we ought to kind of err on a way of making that material available, even if it's not maximally protecting public privacy, even though I think that there should be, like I said, I think that is a very high concern that we ought to have about information which needn't be released, but which might be included in videos that are of concern. So ideally, I would like material to be kind of screened with an eye towards sensitive material that is of kind of legitimate privacy interests. But I'm anticipating that, like I said, of that category of material of videos that are deemed to be particularly sensitive, that there will not be that many of those videos. That was not a question, sorry, that was just a statement. But I would certainly welcome anyone's feedback about whether or not they think that either one, that there would be more videos that I'm suggesting in that first category, or two, whether that kind of balance of releasing videos without, with fewer redactions in order to not overly tax the department's capacities would be a good idea.
I guess I have one question for Chief Murad in regards to this. The hiring freeze for hiring officers, would that prohibit you guys from hiring somebody to do like this kind of evidence-based work, video redactions type work?
No, it would not. Although our ID tech is solo at the moment, because we had two ID techs. One left in January. It took us a long time to identify a partner and hire another. That individual had stayed only a very short time owing to family considerations. She was not from Burlington. It was a big move for her, and it became difficult. Left quickly. We only just hired another. So hiring can take time, but we are not prohibited because of the resolution for racial justice from hiring those kinds of positions, and in fact could, if authorized and if necessary, based on a change in this kind of release policy.
Thank you. Commissioner Hart, followed by Commissioner Seguina.
I'll make this quick then. So do you anticipate then the department having the capacity to do more selective redactions of video in the near future?
Do you mean owing to the fact that we do have another person in the ID unit now? Or
correct.
As soon as that individual gets spun up on the technology, sure, that will absolutely increase the bandwidth on this. It'll also just make what should have been a two-person job all along a two-person job again for Amy's sake.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Commissioner
I
Savino?
think DC Sullivan's got a point too, which may be apropos to this.
Go ahead, I can wait.
I was just going to say, we're in the process of transferring over to a barcoded evidence documentation system. And we periodically have to go through and audit the evidence that we have. So my understanding from talking to our current ID tech is that it would probably take one person fully dedicated 5 years to go through all of the evidence that we have and re-document it into the new system. So just as far as we have this one other ID tech, that we have a lot of other background issues that we're having to deal with in addition to this topic also.
For Chief Murad, does the time it takes to redact, is that similar to the time it takes to do facial blurring? Are those both time intensive?
Yes. So essentially, it takes 3 times as long as the video that is being contemplated for review or release to be redacted. You have to watch it. You then go through it and redact faces as necessary, blurring. And then you go through it again and do audio. That's the current process, and it is laborious and it takes time. There are some technologies out there that claim to be able to do it better. Commissioner Nipper has mentioned some. I shared with Commissioner Grant some documents that come from the vendor, Axon, for a lot of money. They offer packages that claim to do some of this using artificial intelligence in better ways. The other, by the way, processes that I neglected to mention is that the work has to be checked by someone else. So there's another viewing to ensure that the proper redactions were made prior to its release. But those things do cost. They're not really perfect yet by any means. And for the time being, this isn't CGI. Nobody goes through it frame by frame and repaints. You put a box on somebody's face, and for the most part, the box can then follow that face around unless the face moves a certain way or goes off screen a certain way, and then the box loses it. And you have to reinitiate that at that point. So it takes time.
Thanks.
Kyle Dawson, sorry for your title. My apologies.
I'm wondering if, for the sake of moving things along, notwithstanding what sound like legitimate challenges and impediments, that there be a proposal move forward that takes those things into consideration. I have not heard, per going back to Randall, that it's absolutely impossible or illegal to send out unredacted footage. And maybe I missed that, but that could be one proposal. And then another proposal could be inclusive of the costs that it would take to have someone do the redacting that we think is necessary. So, moving forward, it's always going to be the case that we'll have to make decisions. So there's a strong interest in the public in having this, and we can present to the to the mayor a way that it can happen where we release a lot more footage, particularly perhaps the ones Randall is speaking of that are of particular interest, and then we put in the proposal what things would be necessary to make that happen. And then there's a decision about how important it is. Do we make it happen? But rather than, this is similar to a conversation we had before. So rather than doing that, let's just put it forward and say, this is what's requested. Here's what it would take to meet that request. And then we can decide whether that's something we want to do.
Yeah.
I imagine, Chief, Jabu, there must be exemplars, people we talk to, forces that do the redacting at this level, and how many people do they use? How many, man and woman hours does it take? I imagine that there's someone out there doing more releasing of body cam footage than we are, and figuring out what they had to do to make that happen. Or maybe that's not true. I don't know. Maybe that's a false assumption on my part.
Believe that that it would behoove. I don't know the full story. I do know that Seattle for a while was releasing almost everything, and then it found out that it couldn't release everything, and then it realized that it couldn't release anything, and actually, I think, stopped its program. And a couple of other entities have found themselves in similar straits. I'd want to drill into that better, because I'm not giving a full picture of that story, and it's certainly more nuanced and complicated than I am relaying. But there have been situations like that, and certainly it would be worth looking into to determine that.
Commissioner Hart.
Thanks. Just a clarifying question then. So absent right now a policy that determines, that governs every such instance, right now, Chief Murad, do you see any kind of obstacles right now to your making a decision to release some footage that would kind of meet one of those initial categories that you deem to be of interest to the public?
No, I do not. And we have done so on an ad hoc basis. I think the question has been all along removing that ad hocness, if such is a term, so that it doesn't appear to be only done in instances that are to the benefit of the department, for example. But we have done it in the past. I am firmly in favor of doing it more often. You know, I think that the issue is a uniform policy that then sweeps up a lot of things that aren't as necessary and eat resources.
Understood. Thank you.
Mr. Dodson.
Hope this doesn't fall into the category of perhaps cavalier or irresponsible, but we're in this moment, and there's lots of things being asked for. And in my short time of research and conversations, it appears to be the case that on many of these reforms, there aren't terribly many communities that are way down the road. Right? There doesn't seem to be places that are 15, 20 years in. They worked out the kinks. They know exactly how it works. There's just not a lot of that. So, you know, there's a certain amount, I think, of ready, shoot, aim. And that we kind of get out in front of things, right? And that if we're fairly confident there won't be a lawsuit or a massive federal fine or something, that we just do things, because otherwise bringing up what can be legitimate concerns, because the devil's in the details on all this stuff, appears to the public to be obstruction. It makes it look like the chief always wants to bring up some impediment. And rather than that, let's just put the stuff out there. And then we'll have maybe the same experience other places have, where we do something and then we got to pull it back because we learned after we did it. But at least we can learn in our community, and there'll be a dialogue, and we'll say, hey, the people asked for it. We put resources to it, and we put the thing out there, and then we learned. And then we, you know, have to change. But at least the experience will serve as the thing that causes an adjustment, not the chief of police saying, well, there's all these things in the way, so we shouldn't even do it. And not that John's saying that. I'm really saying that I don't think, it doesn't sound like this proposal is something that the chief would necessarily disagree with. So let's give the people what they want, and then, you know, move forward. My suggestion.
Commissioner Hart.
Yeah, thanks. No, yeah, and to be clear, like I am entirely in favor of having a policy that says that when kind of particular footage is of concern to the mayor, the chief of police, the city council, I'm sorry, the police commission, that footage should be released, kind of prioritized for release. I'm happy with a policy that says that. I'm also happy with, obviously, a policy that indicates that the department is complying with the law with respect to public records requests. Right, that is also important. I think that there is danger in having a policy that essentially says that the department is releasing every amount of footage that it has because of just the concerns about surveillance. Right? So that becomes a large amount of footage, which is covering people in a lot of different aspects of their lives. And when you say, well, you know, like we can work out the kinks down the line, and the problem, of course, with the current age of data processing is that once that information is released, that information doesn't go back into the bottle, right? So I do think that kind of making sure that that any policy which is kind of initially formulated is tailored as narrowly as possible to the primary concerns, right? The incidents that are of particular importance, and that is not something which is kind of purely determined by the chief of police or by the mayor, but that there is some oversight of that by kind of, the police commissioner or the representatives of the population of Burlington. I think that is important, but I am certainly concerned about the surveillance aspect of just saying, kind of, put things out there because people want it to be out there, and then we'll figure it out down the line. I think that would be too hasty of a policy to adopt. And again, and the memo that the mayor put out was, I think, a little bit vague about how that would happen. So that's my major concern.
If I may, the one time that I, during my 2 stints as acting chief, have put out video was because inquiries were made indicative of a pending suit. And that was what was that level of public interest and a desire for, therefore, public clarity and transparency was what required it. In other instances, I think that we could discuss, and I believe I discussed that matter with the police commission and discussed the intention to do that. But I think that with other instances, I mean, that might be a threshold. It may be a threshold that public inquiry has been made. I have shared in other instances video with various members of the commission, not in the entirety, because of specific questions raised by members of the community via social media, via direct contact by members of the community to members of the police commission. And in those instances, had police commissioners decided as a body, let's release this, I would have been happy to do so. Similarly, if the police commission itself is something that can, on behalf of the community, view things and say not needed to be released, or we've seen it, then that too is a potential policy. I'm not proposing that. I'm suggesting, I don't know if the police commission feels that it can sort of carve out for itself that role, although frankly, I think that is a portion of its role. But nevertheless, those are the situations and instances in which we have shared these kinds of footages, absent them being requested by someone else, taken by someone else, and then released by someone else.
Mr. Johnson.
I wonder if we step back a little bit, and anyone please weigh in if you think I might be a bit off here. But so in place, as I understand it, as it relates to what happens in terms of officer interaction, is I've been in conversations with the command about a new system that captures that where this data will be put. So already officers need to record what they do, and then there's a process through command, through leadership, through up through like sergeants, lieutenants, right, and up to the DCs that reviews things. So there is a process, but the problem is we have a trust issue, right? So there's oversight, but part of the body cam is a trust issue. And one of the things that you can do to, and this is once again, if we're looking at this as a trust issue and a transparency issue, rather than putting out all the footage, we could find some thoughtful way of putting out footage on some kind of cycle that would effectively serve as a spot check. We'd still have Randall's piece. This would be in addition to the specific ones that raise to a level. Maybe the standard is not quite what the chief talked about with 2 suits, but there's something pretty controversial, pretty significant to be looked at, and those are specific. But beyond that, there could be a spot check, right? The officers always have this footage, but we would only release it on some interval, and we release some significant amount of it on some interval so people could see this is what it looks like when Burlington officers interact with the public. And it could perhaps serve as part of this trust piece because people could say, well, I saw that and the person was courteous and they have a procedure and they followed it and it seemed kosher. And maybe that could help to serve some of the purpose of having the body cam footage available. If indeed I'm capturing, I imagine that's my sense of why people want to see the body cam footage. And maybe we just create a policy that seems to address what the public's concerns are for greater transparency and accountability. And it would be random, so people would just be behaving the way they behave. They wouldn't even know when it's going to be shown because there's so much of it. But we just release it on some intervals as a way to say, hey, here's what we've been up to lately.
Commissioner Harp.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Yeah, good. So I mean, my concern about that would again be if the identity of the person who's interacting with that police officer in that ordinary encounter, whatever might occasion that. If that person's identity is not redacted at all, then I'd be concerned about just kind of releasing a percentage of footage. And I think there'd also be concerns if you say, well, this is a kind of random sampling, there'd be concerned about whether or not that's actually random or whether it's just kind of selecting certain videos which satisfy certain requirements. So I mean, I understand the idea behind that, but I would be certainly concerned, like I said, about having, right, because again, people who, there are exemptions that allow people to request that they not be filmed during encounters with officers. People can request officers turn off their body cam, they can stop recording, and that can be complied with under certain circumstances. But most people don't know that. Most people don't understand whether or not, if they ask an officer to stop recording, what the consequences of that would be. So essentially that's saying, well, people have not actually given their consent for those images in themselves in this encounter to be made available, and yet it's going to be anyways against their wish or consent. I would be concerned with that in general. So that's the kind of general concern that I have. Like I said, that's less of a concern for me for what I'm going to say are incidents of particular concern, but just for kind of ordinary encounters, again, I would worry about that the same way I worry about just kind of CCTV from stores or like on Church Street, like if that were kind of made available to anyone to look at any time. That's problematic. And again, that also makes a kind of a basis for training data for algorithms and AI and things like that as well. So I'd be concerned about that as well.
DC Sullivan.
I like the idea, and one of the issues is, and I think Joy touched on this earlier, is there are some areas, right, where there's this expectation of privacy. And so even if we were to take, say, a segment of video, we would still have to go through all that video and make sure we weren't violating, one, whether the person had a subjective expectation of privacy, and then the second prong of that is society willing to recognize that expectation as reasonable? So certainly, I mean, we're all here on Zoom in our homes, but the home has the highest expectation of privacy legally, right? So that's why officers need to get search warrants to go into somebody's home. So that's something of concern. I mean, we would have to, if we were taking, blocks of video, we would have to look at that. Now in public places though, there is no expectation of privacy. So regardless, even if somebody had this subjective expectation of, I don't want my image on video, legally, I don't think that holds water. So, and to your point, Commissioner Harp, you can log on to the city camera system that's filming Church Street at any time and watch it live. And it is picking everybody up, and it's just out there in the public. But as far as releasing this, if we were to take samples of video, we would still have to go through all that video to make sure, it wasn't an officer engaging, because there are certain exceptions for officers, right? They're responding to an emergency call for service. They enter somebody's home. They have the camera system on. I wouldn't necessarily want that released to the public because the public may not have that same exception as far as the expectation of privacy goes.
But to be clear, you mentioned at one point, Randall, the idea of a person not wanting to be filmed. Absent that person's participation in an investigation or being a witness to something that may actually have some sort of privacy issues for a court case down the road, absent the subject matter being such, for example, domestic violence or sex assaults, we don't turn off a camera merely because someone says, I really don't want that. It's not a direct provision in the directive. And if an officer were to do so, he or she would have to make a case for it to a supervisor at a later point.
So, I mean, my understanding was that that was not, again, I'd have to look at it again. I thought that was that was stated in the lead model body cam policy, which we're now required to adopt by S124. So I thought that was in there, but I'll check again about that.
That may be. I was referring to our current directive.
Yeah, understood. And then just really quickly in response to DC Sullivan. So yeah, I was not speaking about what is legally permissible, but just kind of what we ought to be guided by. So I think that there are, right, so again, based on how we understand public spaces, right, there's no legal expectation of privacy in public spaces. That does not, I think, entail that the department should act in such a way as to make any footage that it shoots in a public space as available, as recorded and archived and available to the public. I think that would be not a good thing, even if it were legally permissible right now.
Okay, then. So, sorry, Mr. Dotson.
So that this is somewhat of a, I guess, a question and a statement. And with all due respect for a thoughtful conversation, as I move along, my brain just moves to how do we get to yes, right? Because as you can imagine, in my job, I'm in multiple conversations, and some number of them go like this. So this meeting is going to end, and one of us, I've got confused now. Is this on your plate, Jabu? I can't remember who's the person who's running with this one and trying to pull it together, but they'll be left once again on their own to work through a lot of difficulties. So maybe I go back to the idea after these piece that I brought up, is that it seems like for any number of reasons, we want someone to be able to do some redacting, right? That there needs to be someone who's looking at them and taking the raw footage and getting it into a form that we feel more comfortable with. So maybe, once again, the answer is to just cost out that, kind of find out the labor, get an estimate of the labor implications and the cost of that, and just include that. Say that here's, policy with boundaries. And I think Randall and others have talked about some boundaries. Seems like DC Sullivan has a lot of input. So we craft a policy that has these boundaries that make sense. It won't be everything, but we do that. And we do it in the context of having a resource that is able to handle requests and handle redacting and handle the labor component that it seems to come up again and again that will be required for us to do this in a way that protects privacy and takes care of a number of other issues.
Commissioner Harp.
I think Commissioner Durfee had her hand up first. After her.
My apologies. Commissioner Durfee.
Yeah, I want to get to yes. There's been an awful lot of work done on this, and it is a very, we can talk about it a lot. I am not the chair, and I'm not going to tell people what to do, but I think everyone has had a chance to read the mayor's memorandum, the framework that he suggests that we work on to deliver a full policy here. I don't know if everyone has read that, but there's been a significant amount of work done on that, and so we should, as part of this conversation, make a plan for yes. If we're going to, whether we're moving it on to, for review to the ACLU, whether we're we really kind of, for me, I would like a plan so that we can move forward. This has been asked for by the people. And so, I get all the constraints. I don't really think that, further discussion on, how long it takes to redact. I don't think the policy, the memorandum says anything about, anything that's actually not, it's a great starting point. I think there's some concerns with it. So just wanting this group to sort of get to a place where there can be some direction so that we can finish up on this.
I agree with that. Commissioner Harp.
Yeah, thanks. So of course, some of this discussion will be moot by January of 2022, which is when there's a requirement that there be a new body cam policy, which is adopted by every department in the state. And that I assume will have more guidance about a release policy, a footage release policy as well, though I suspect that might just speak more directly to public records requests. But some of this will be moot by 2022. I think it sounds to me as though there's general agreement about the importance of being able to release footage as informative as possible with as few redactions as possible for matters of particular importance. And I think there's also agreement that, again, that the Public Records Act needs to be complied with, since that is the law. And so the question might be kind of how is that done? But that's kind of a slightly separate question. Then kind of what to do about yeah, so both cases I think can be handled slightly, separately. And I think that there's general agreement that there should be, right, so it should not seem to the public as though the only decisions about when footage gets released are being made by the chief of police or by the mayor, because the expectation would be that footage would only be released when it's advantageous to the department. So it's useful to have a policy that makes it clear that is not the only consideration, so that there's more confidence when footage gets released. And so I think that some of that can be done by kind of clearly indicating that the police commission has kind of not only the responsibility of doing certain footage, but also has the capability of requesting footage get released. So that all seems like we're pretty much on yeses on that already, and that can be written up. I'm not sure what areas still need some deliberation. I mean, some of that's going to involve kind of the technical capacity, but a footage right now can be written that says something like, footage will be kind of redacted in accordance with the technical capacity of the department, but one, that police commission will always be able to see unredacted footage, and two, that footage will kind of be released in a way which kind of maximizes information flow to the public, subject to those constraints. That seems also useful.
Commissioner Seguina.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Commissioner Harp. I would just have one exception to what you said, and that is that I just heard this buzzing and I just totally lost my train of thought. So let me see if it comes back to me. Sorry. Randall, do you mind just saying the last thing that you were talking about?
It was about.
Go ahead.
No, it's just going to be about footage being kind of released as, with the maximum amount of information flow to the public possible, subject to certain constraints, kind of possibly technical constraints.
Oh, okay. That was, thank you. Now I remember. So I think, I really appreciate Director Dodson's comment on this. I don't think we want to have a policy that says that release of videos is restricted by redacting capacity. I think we want to meet that. We want to, if it requires additional resources, that should be part of the policy. Because that is the demand, right? And it is the public's demand to have greater transparency. And so if there's a cost associated with that, we should think about meeting that as well, and not use the limited resources that currently exist as a reason not to release videos.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with all of that. I think I was just thinking a policy needs to be in place regardless of what the capacities are. So yeah. I don't think we should kind of conditionalize a policy on, this policy, if we get this capacity, and that policy, we get that capacity. That would be a bad idea. But otherwise, I agree with everything you said.
So it seems like we're in agreement with that. Moving forward, then I believe we should be able to then make this policy regardless of cost constraints, maybe include that with, if we need that, include that part of it. So I guess moving forward, seeing how Karen, Milo, and Randall were working on this, Karen, do you want to take lead on this, writing up this policy based on the memorandum and the things we've talked about here? I would entertain that, I guess, once that's written up, have maybe a special meeting to pass that and to get it done with before next meeting. Commissioner Durfee.
Yeah, so I think you were asking me a question. That's great, thank you. So in order to, because I feel like we've talked through a number of things several times, and there's people who are saying, yep, I agree with that, and then someone else says it, and I don't agree. So let's do this. If I'm going to continue to work on it, based on this discussion, if everyone has the memorandum, we have to, because of open meeting laws, do everything sort of consensus. So if anybody has any feedback, I believe you are allowed to send me that feedback, and I can incorporate it and then bring it to the group. So it would just be one-on-one, someone send me, Randall, I have some things from you, but if you want to clarify tonight's discussion, that's great, because and then I can just put it together, and next meeting is a while out, but Director Dodson, if you're okay with that, we could just present something the next meeting.
Sure. I mean, I'm once again, I'm still trying to figure out. I'm not so sure I own the process. I'm a facilitator, catalyst, influencer of the process, but I do think that anything to expedite things and within the realm of responsibility to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough.
Yeah, and I'll just speak directly to that. I've heard quite a bit of agreement here, and if we wanted to spend an extra 5 minutes on it and say, yes, I've read the memorandum, these are the things to be included, I think it might be worth it, because if we wait, it's another month, and my understanding is that I can make as long as we're not discussing it via email, if I make some edits and then present the draft, folks can go ahead and see it. So I'm hearing, Randall, I've got your comments. We're also stating that the police commission, we feel that in this memorandum, it should say that the police commission is able to see unredacted footage and can do that on behalf of citizens. And then we were talking about putting something in there about costing. That I need some clarification on. So if people have, if people want to say now, Jabu, would you want to hear that now, or do you want to move on and we can try to do this one-on-one?
I'd love to hear what Commissioner Seguino has to say, but then I'm happy to move on.
I think the costing is a separate issue. I think the policy is what it is, and then institutionally, the institutions have to find the resources to implement the policy. So I think it's a separate issue.
Thank you.
DC Sullivan, was that your hand raised? I couldn't tell, sorry.
No, I apologize. I had
Okay.
some things going on in the background.
Okay, not a problem. All right, then I think we are in agreement moving forward with how to come up with this. I would also like to say that once you do have a policy written, I'm happy to schedule like a special meeting just to review it, stamp it, and get it out before the next meeting as well too. So I think I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
That would be my preference.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. So I think we're in agreement with that. Are there any other further questions or comments on 5.05? I'm not seeing any. Moving on to now the amended agenda, which is 5.06, a discussion on S124, which was recently passed in the Vermont State Legislature. And so there were some questions about kind of how this pertains to the work that we're doing. And I guess there's also questions about how the BPD is adapting to S124. So Chief Mira, do you have anything to say to this?
Thank you. So we have been much more in tune with S119, and we're not looking at S124 as much yet. There are certainly things that we do. I think that we and I encourage Deputy Chief Sullivan to elaborate on this too. But with regard to, for example, Section 9 and the existing requirements for roadside data. I confirm that we are working to be in full compliance with that, have been. There's some issues with how to distinguish between evidence found, for example. Do you have to specify the type? If those kinds of questions some of those have to do with the documentation tools, and some of those have to do with the actual instrument that you use to mark. There's some Valcor issues, but we think that those are going to be resolved because we actually believe that Valcor may end up being more widely adopted, which would benefit everyone simply because it would give powers of scale for making necessary changes to the data ends of Valcor. And then some things, we note that there are some changes to, for example, disciplinary reporting measures, and we're prepared for those. Things that you don't have to wait for an investigation to have been completed. There are reporting needs now that will be done as soon as a complaint or knowledge of a situation comes in. I'll discuss that a little bit more in executive session. And I think that there are some very interesting notes that it has with regard to training, and how it incorporates different groups into the creation of training, et cetera. But frankly, we did not focus a lot on 124. We were very focused on 119 and the ways in which it comports with the use of force policy that we just promulgated. I think that in almost every respect, our use of force policy is as strong as or superior to the requirements of 119, with the one exception of its absolute ban on chokeholds. I think that is going to fail the first time an officer on her back being stabbed by a larger opponent reaches up and strangles the man because she can't get to her firearm as he's strangling her. As he's stabbing her. I don't believe that will pass legal muster to prevent that unilaterally. I think that the idea of having a prohibition on one kind of deadly force versus another kind when deadly force is lawful is not one that will ultimately withstand legal scrutiny, but no officer wants to be in that position at all, much less be in the test case position. So we will be amending our use of force directive accordingly as that goes into full effect. But our use of force policy currently says it's prohibited unless instances of other lethal force would be allowed. We'll make note of S119 and the laws that it's changed. But S124, I'm looking forward through it more. I mean, it was 43 something pages as far as the variety of different laws that it amends and affects.
Thank you for that. And I guess sorry, you're muted. But I guess not to jump ahead too far, but I was going to ask for the agenda item for next meeting to hear about what complacency with S119. So thank you for that. DC Sullivan.
I was just going to add that one of the pieces of this legislation, I want to say section 15, is just a slight modification on what was pre-existing, and this is probably of the most important operational impact as far as reporting goes. So that already is existing in statute and current. It's just a slight modification.
Thank you. I have a quick question. This might be for Joy, but I'll direct it to both you, Chief Merritt, and DC Sullivan. When January 1st, 2022 comes about, will this make our use of force policy no longer valid, and we'll have to make a new one, or will this one be like the letter of the law of the land and invalidate our one? Sorry, Randall's hand up first, followed by DC Sullivan.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it is in effect now. It already supersedes were you talking about 119 or 124? I mean, in either case, in both of them supersede what we have for, if we have a policy, those stipulate what the policy has to be. So the use of force policy that 119 states is in effect now for BPD. Likewise for the body cam policy that 124 lays out. It says it's conditional until 2022, but still they're in effect now. That's my understanding anyways.
DC Sullivan?
Yeah, at the very bottom of the statute, you can see the effective dates. It sometimes varies depending on section. Some of it comes into effect right away, and some of it is slightly delayed. As to your initial question, I believe that our policy is very sound, and I believe you will see the state probably create a policy that is very similar to ours. It may, again, have some subtle differences, but I think we are on very sound ground with our current policy. But if and when the state adopts a policy, so for example, our taser policy is a good example. We spent a lot of time creating our taser policy or conducted electrical weapon policy. and the state used it largely as the basis for the statewide conducted electrical weapon policy when that was created. So I feel like you will see the same thing happen in this case.
So in that case, will the state statute always supersede like the municipal statute then?
Yeah, so I should have added that when the state created that conducted electrical weapon policy, we were advised by the city attorney's office that we should adopt it verbatim, and that's what we did.
Okay. And are we allowed to hypothetically build on whatever the state statute is and make ours a little bit stronger just without, I guess, omitting certain parts of the state statute?
I'm sure we could always add to some extent, but that would be also a legal question for the city attorney's office. But I don't see why we couldn't. If there was something that we felt was missed in the state statute, we would still have to abide by state statute regardless, but I'm sure we could add additional pieces.
Just to add to that, I haven't had enough time to dig into this to say specifically, but what I've seen with a lot of these statutes is that the state statute is a floor and we can build on them unless there's something that says otherwise. So you can look into that.
That's correct. And just to clarify, the justifiable homicide part that does include that, for example, ban on chokeholds, that takes effect on July 1st, 2021. So there is time for us to adapt our use of force policy to that. As I stated before, I believe that to be the only place where this policy is more stringent or restrictive. I believe that in all other ways, our existing use of force policy that all of you, many of you were a part of creating during the Committee to Review Policing Practices, and all of you, well, not all of you, Professor Seguino, Commissioner Seguino, as a new ad, were part of approving, after a relatively robust back and forth on that. It's a 35-page document. It is, I feel confident saying, the strongest in the state, and it is very thorough. And I don't believe there's anything in this, with that exception, that is not already in ours and more pronounced in ours.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the commissioners in regards to S-124 right now? I am not seeing any, which moves us on to agenda item number 6, which is commendations that have been received. And for this, I'll shift back to Ms. Trammell.
I actually don't have any to share with you this month.
All right, thank you for that. And moves us on to agenda item number 7, which is commissioner updates or comments. And so I'm just going to say one quick thing before I let you take over, Randall. Commissioner Seguino, this is the part of the meeting where anything that's on your mind, any commissioner comments or updates that you have you want to bring out to us or anyone zooming in, this is where you can take the floor. So with that, I'll give it back to Commissioner Hart.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question to Chief Murad or DC Sullivan or whomever. This is just a question about, so given that between now and the next Police Commission meeting, there will have been an election. I was wondering whether any instructions have been given out about either kind of officer. So 2 questions. One is with respect to kind of officer behavior with respect to political messaging in or out of uniform prior to the election. And second, with respect to kind of any either cause for service or behavior at polling places. So I was just wondering kind of whether any instruction have been given to officers.
Yes. I reminded officers of our obligations for impartiality as outlined in DD-01 and prohibitions on political activity a few weeks ago. And we have been having, so that's one answer to your question. We will be having officers around the city. We'll be paying attention to polling locations. We will not be posted at polling locations. That is a policy of this agency, but also a recommendation by the Secretary of State and the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety. And we have been in conversations even today. Deputy Chief Lebrecht and I were in a very long conversation with members, with federal partners at the U.S. Marshal's Office at the federal courthouse. We've had numerous meetings with members of the Vermont State Police. The Chittenden County law enforcement executives will meet on Thursday and we'll be discussing this. And State's Attorney George will be convening a meeting on Friday to discuss this with regard to the issue of both polling location safety, which is, I think the most pronounced concern there is the potential for militia type groups to appear and practice some kind of voter intimidation. We have no intelligence that that is going to occur. I don't have any real concerns about that occurring in Burlington, but it is the responsibility of polling locations to quickly make it known. And the Secretary of State has sent out very clear instructions on how that gets communicated to law enforcement and what law enforcement will do. And we're aware of that and are planning for anything like that were it to occur. Frankly, I am more concerned, as are, I think some of our other law enforcement partners, of the possibility of an election that is not settled by Wednesday morning and may have people in the streets to express their concerns and displeasure about that by Wednesday night. Bush v. Gore was not settled until December 12th of 2000. That is a very long time. Now, that is separate from the notion, I think, improper legal interpretation that results have to be settled the night of. They don't, and they oftentimes are not. But we do want a quick settlement. And I don't believe anyone wants anything other than a clear and certain outcome that is lawful and agreed upon that night. That is the best case scenario for the American Republic. But for the event that that's not the case, we're talking about that with law enforcement partners. We're talking about mutual aid should we need it. We're talking about, making certain that we observe people's First Amendment rights and that free speech and First Amendment events are as safe as they possibly can be. So these are all discussions that are being had by law enforcement here in the region. I have an FBI meeting about it tomorrow as well. So that's another meeting. I don't know how many I just named off, 5, 6.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hart.
Did any of you folks who couldn't make last night's meeting, did you all get an update on the next meeting date for the joint committee and how we left things, or do you want a 2-minute update?
I was not there.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure. So we have a November 5th Monday. Well, that must, whatever day that is, the 5th is Thursday, right? I don't know, Thursday. So we have a November 5th meeting at 5:30, and the two things that are scheduled, the RFP that went out and we selected, Commissioner Durfee is waiting on some of the references. So we pushed that out to the 5th. So we can hear back from Commissioner Durfee on whatever references she hears back from. And then on the second RFP, which was the assessment of the department, it went out yesterday. And so folks wanted more time to look at it. So that will be taken up as well with Counselor Hightower, and I will be trying to take some of the comments from last night and doing another draft. So that's where we left last night. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page.
I'm sorry, when you say went out, you mean it was distributed to the joint committee?
I'm sorry, I didn't. Can you say that again, Randall?
Sorry, you said that the second RFP went out.
Oh, yeah.
Yesterday.
Did you get it yesterday? Yes.
It was distributed to a committee yesterday, is what you mean.
Yes, that's what I meant.
It was published. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so if you didn't get it, let us know because you should have gotten that draft yesterday. So that's it. Thanks.
Commissioner Seguino.
Commissioner Hart with a T. Is it possible for us to get the revised draft of that RFP maybe 2 days in advance of the meeting? It's really hard to provide feedback in the moment. So if we could have 2 days, that would really be great.
Yeah, I will circle back with Counselor Hightower and try to have us meet this week so we can get that out. As you can imagine, that as a city councilor, she is extremely busy, but I will see if we can get our meeting in and do that. Thank you.
All right. Any other commissioner updates or comments?
I just had a couple. So as you know, I've had a specific concern about communication and information being dispersed in the community, and just with the chief reviewing the numbers again earlier, I kind of refer to it as like the ABCs 1, 2, 3s of basic info in terms of what the department does. Would anybody have a problem if I just started working on that? I mean, we've talked about it before, but we don't need a quote unquote policy for it. It's more or less doing outreach and using community resources to disperse more information to educate as many people as possible in the community with what the police department actually does.
Commissioner Harp.
Yeah, thanks. Could you just say some more about what you mean by work on that?
Well, we've talked about it, but we haven't done anything. So when we talk about the numbers that the chief presents, and he presents them to us, and he presents them to people that might listen to the meeting live, or they might watch it on community TV in the future. But there's a lot of other media, community and commercial, where this information can be dispersed, and it's not being dispersed.
Okay, guys. So by work on, you just mean kind of disseminate the information more widely. Yeah.
Right. And I have some ideas about, and Kyle, I have to finish my email to you, but I have some ideas to what I would like to see is I would like to see between the TV stations, community and public, between the radio stations, commercial and public, more information about what the department does, and then engagement with the department and the community. And I don't think it's something that has to wait until an RFP, that RFP is completed. I think it's just something that needs to be occurring on a regular basis and isn't. And then perhaps part of Kyle's job is how do we get the department some additional resources, because the department doesn't have a dedicated communications person.
I have no problem whatsoever with. I believe all the information we get during this meeting is public. So I mean, in terms of disseminating like that report, I have absolutely no problem with that. I don't think anybody else would have a problem with that. I don't think I quite understand what you're asking, but I have no problem with you working on that work. Sorry, continue.
I guess I just didn't want to be out there in the community. Commissioner Grant's doing this and talking to this and arranging this, and and then people start to feel some kind of way.
Oh no!
Because I mean, like going down to the media factory, putting a camera on my shoulder, and talking to police officers, right, and then talking to the public, and then editing that together. I mean, I have a lot of ideas of things that I feel like, well, my dream is if I get the ball rolling, then more people will want to be involved in doing some production. So I want to start out by keeping things very simple, with starting out with basic information, but kind of gather steam to just really extend the different types of outreach, and just trying to work towards some outreach too. That would be the ultimate goal. Start out by communication, education, and then really put it together with some outreach.
I saw Chief Mira's hand first, followed by Commissioner Durfee, followed by Mr. Dodson.
So this is what Commissioner Grant is talking about is far wider in scope than this, but we do put the numbers themselves that are given to you all are put out on social media, on Twitter, on the first of the month. They're different because for you, I'm doing meeting to meeting. On Twitter, I'm doing the first of the month. But that is the tiniest portion of what Commissioner Grant's talking about. And I think what she is talking about is a full-fledged communications plan that talks about, how we start thinking about the agency, how we start communicating about the agency, how we share what the agency does in ways that are helpful, and how we start building up what Director Dodson routinely talks about, this issue of trust. And that trust can't occur without without communications. So, yeah.
It was Commissioner Durfee, followed by Dodson.
So I thank you, Commissioner Grant. Maybe it would be helpful for us all to support that initiative by maybe having something on the agenda for, that talks about community. I know that we've received some calls. A woman called in and said, yeah, wouldn't it be nice if the police department had pictures of the police officers and bios on their website? There's been some feedback given from the public that suggests that there should be more communication and more, transparency. So maybe that's an agenda item, so that, the work that you're doing doesn't feel disconnected, and so that you can get some support with that, Commissioner Grant. So maybe it's a more of a, yeah, it's great, that Commissioner Grant's saying that she wants to do it, but, it's really, an opportunity and a duty, for all of us. So, and I'd be absolutely 100% interested in hearing, a report back on that work too. So, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, and I would definitely report back on it. I just feel like we've discussed it in a few other meetings, but I haven't really felt like I've gotten to the point where if I take this time that I have to volunteer and I can start to roll with it, there's, as we all know, there is just so much going on. And that's another piece of it too. There's a lot of moving pieces, and I consider myself to be quote unquote engaged, and I can't always keep up with everything that's going on. I mean, you definitely talk to people who really care about the issues, yet they are not, I don't want to say some people are misinformed. There are a lot of people that are not fully informed. So they're making assumptions that are not, I think things are very sensitive and volatile without people making incorrect assumptions based on incomplete information, or because they missed a piece of information, or because they missed a particular discussion, or they missed a particular update being done by a particular committee. And how can we have like one resource as well? That's a kind of a larger project that's just kind of keeping track of everything and making it easy for people to find. Like sometimes they go to the city's website and it's not easy to find. And the chief and I have had a discussion about the data dashboard. It's there and you can go to it and you can kind of spend some time with it, but it's not user friendly. It's not something that's practical to expect people to do. We want to present information in a way that it's easily absorbed. We don't want people to hunt and peck, I guess, is my overall concern. So those were just some ideas that I have.
I appreciate those because I do feel that not being fully informed is something that that's very prevalent out there. I mean, all the emails we were getting in the month of September was from a lot of people as being not fully informed in what is going on, what we can do and can't do. So I fully support what you're trying to do. I don't know how I can help you, but if there's anything I can do to help you with this, please let me know.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner? Mr. Dotson.
Yes, so just a couple quick comments. One is Commissioner Grant and I did have a very nice conversation, and I just think it's important up front to acknowledge and appreciate her interest in doing this very important work of communication and offering herself up to support in ways that make sense and fit, as Chief Murad alluded to. I think a more comprehensive plan. I'm sort of working on pulling together what has up to this point been a lot of meetings and interactions and consultation to put something a little more concrete together in terms of my plan. And I think what I've gleaned, and I would be interested to hear someone with a different take, is one of our biggest challenges now, as Chief Murad spoke of, is trust. And that question, which I'm trying, have as many conversation in BPD about, is, I would argue, related to, but not based solely upon what trust BPD has, is what trust police as a function in our nation have, because it is very challenging and somewhat, I think, illegitimate in the eyes of many onlookers to just suggest that BPD are a group apart and exist in a vacuum. I think everything exists in context in this moment. And we could have another conversation about whether that's fair or just. It just is, right? You put on the uniform, you're cops, and you are in the same fraternity and of the same ilk as Derek Chauvin, as unfair as that might be, given the training you've had, the professionalism you bring to it, the integrity you bring to your work, from the standpoint of a wounded individual who's had bad experience at the hands of the cops. That's what you have. So I think that there needs to be a healing. If we were to go forward and do the comprehensive communication awareness campaign that I am certain is a critical part of police reform and community police trust building, if we just did that now and put together, I think we could put together something pretty thoughtful. I think there's people on the sidelines who want to help out. And if we went out with was said that was the thing, but we led with that, I think it would worsen trust. I think people would say, we're in this moment. George Floyd got killed and you're supposed to be reforming cops, and all you're doing is telling us about all the great stuff they do. I don't think that is what the community is ready for. Although the fact that that's not out there, that I will tell you from being inside the police building, the function, I would argue, is very much a black box. People have no idea, literally no idea what the daily challenges are. I spent all day today, 8-9 hours of training. And I will say that the layperson who was in these scenarios would have, at a very high percentage, would have ended up in scenarios where I could not, in a thoughtful, progressive way of thinking about how we handle these situations, seeing how you could not have found oneself in the position we found ourselves in the scenario. If you did your job, responding to the public and trying to provide public safety, either the person you were responding to as the issue would have been hurt, you would have been hurt, or both. Because I went in and there's a whole lot going on. And that is just to say, I'm only saying that to say it's not to excuse any poor behavior. It's not to change or take away some of our national conversation, but to say there's a lot going on and the public is very ill aware of it. And changing that has got to be part of what we do. But I do think that something robust and hopefully seen as authentic in the way of some sort of healing in our community. We can't help the nation, but I like to think we can do some healing locally. I think it has to precede any effort to increase communication and awareness and expose more the difficult work that police officers do and expose more the good work that is done. I think that's part of a comprehensive plan, but from my perspective, it's a first things first situation. And I do think some healing is appropriate and something that needs to occur first. So I say, yes, we need to get to the point where Commissioner Grant's talking about, and I hope that I can be helpful in providing some support to the chief and the department and to the mayor about how we might do that. And I did have a very, being in the building, it was only 10, but like Chief said, there's 87 minus 2, 85, and 10 folks today, 9 officers and myself, I thought had a very, very productive conversation, a kind of conversation that's not happening across the community yet. But we got down to hard spots and where the rub is and use of force issues and a bunch of things that I think if we could expand that conversation with the kind of trust and good faith in that room, then we'd be a lot better off.
If I could embed the community in the police department the way Director Dodson has been embedded, we would all be better off, not only because he's learning things, but we're learning things from him. And we would learn things from members of the community and be able to understand better what the community wants and what it needs and its own positions. And that's at least as important as sharing the things that we do. And is really the key to being able to move forward with the community and for the community.
And all these things would be part of my concept. I mean, I have a lot of concepts. Like some of it can be going to the various news organizations, public and commercial, and saying, we would like you to put out the basic numbers. We want to, and also kind of cleaning up the city's website is not user-friendly. I have a lot of issues with that. And that's another discussion and very long email for another day. But even to think about what's going on in each ward. And I've brought this up before. I'm a citizen of Ward 3. A lot of things happen in Ward 3, more than I was aware of before I started looking at the numbers when I took this position. But no outreach to me saying how I, as a resident of Ward 3, can assist the department in keeping my neighborhood safe. So that's part of it too. But I also envision talking to people. So it's going to be, I don't want to do a quote unquote, because I know some people are going to worry about what people call propaganda, propaganda, but it's propaganda. I'm not interested in that. I am interested in, because we're all human. I'm interested in the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm interested in showing opinions and hopefully with some brave individuals, some interactions that the community can learn from police officers about what their feelings are and vice versa. Because, we've had these conversations before where people feel that certain opinions and certain things and certain demands, some of the demands that we've heard from the community came out of quote unquote nowhere. Well, what are people talking about? Why are people shouldn't be making these demands, that there's nothing behind them. It's like, well, they don't come out of nowhere. There's very specific reasons that specific demands were being made. So how do we educate police officers why these demands are coming from the community so that they see and understand the points of view? And then how do we go to the community and say, these are the things that the officers are actually doing on a day-to-day basis? Because when you have part of the community that doesn't really at all respect what the officers are doing because they don't feel that officers are there for them, but there are people like, nope, I'm not going to call the police no matter what happens because they're not going to help me. They might hurt me and my family. And so we've got to break through that. And people have to understand why there are people in that community that feel that way. And then even people who are on the complete other side of the spectrum who support officers no matter what, they don't even have a full understanding of what goes on. So it's a lot of ideas. And I just would kind of like to start to chip away at them because with everything else that we've talked about and going on, I just feel like community engagement can be happening now. And it's something that has to start out and then you add to it, then you add to it, then you add to it and keep nurturing it so that it becomes a natural it becomes natural in the community. It just, there's a rhythm, there's a schedule, and hopefully more people, when they see certain interactions, will want to get involved.
I completely agree. I saw Commissioner Durfee's hand raised.
No, I was just going to suggest that this become an agenda item. I want it to get the attention that it deserves. And I've sent an email to Commissioner Grant, but maybe this is something that we can talk about, because I know we got a link for executive session too.
Yep, I'm more than happy to add this to our next meeting agenda moving forward. Absolutely. Any other commissioner updates and or comments? I'm not seeing any, so that moves us on to agenda item number 8.01, which is next meeting agenda items. Looks like this ask of communication and community engagement moving forward, I plan on putting that on the agenda in addition to conversation on BBD compliance with S119. We also need to vote on a draft in regards to today's agenda item 5.03 and 5.04. So I think that right there will be a pretty good agenda to work through for next meeting, which then moves us on to executive session. And it's a question for Chief. Do we have citizen complaints to review in executive session today or tonight?
We have a very small number. I'm hopeful to get this very quickly through. I know it's late and everybody wants to be done with it. Shannon sent out the links, and there's very little, but there's always a few that we have to discuss.
Sounds good. Commissioner Harp?
I move that we enter executive session for the purpose of complaints and possible disciplinary matters.
I second that motion. All in favor of entering executive session, say aye or raise your hand, please.
Aye.
Aye. That is unanimous. We shall move into executive session. The time right now is 8:30. Reconvene at 8:35. And I also want to say that at the end of executive session, that will be the end of the meeting, and meeting will be adjourned at that time. I think that's how I do it. So yeah, 8:30. And I'll see you guys all in 5 minutes for executive session. And for everyone that zoomed in from the public, thank you very much, and we'll hope to see you soon.